So welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. We would like to start with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the Community College of Aurora is on the traditional land of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, Ute, and Sioux people. Well, good morning, everyone. We are from CCA, working under the Title V grant for a developing Hispanic serving institution, and our presentation is titled Education as Liberation, Undoing the Harm of Traditional Pedagogy, or more frankly, pedagogy rooted in whiteness. We will be talking about our work to improve the learning experiences and the learning outcomes for our students in the Gateway course English 121, particularly for our students of color, our students holding marginalized identities who have historically been marginalized from education. We just wanted to take a couple of minutes to introduce ourselves, so I can go first since I'm already speaking. My name is Jasmine Yap. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm an inclusive pedagogy instructional coach at CCA. And just a little bit about me, I live in Denver. I have 2 children and a dog. I love to spend time outdoors and on the water on my paddleboard. I was an adjunct professor and a high school science teacher in the Denver area for several years prior to my current role at CCA. And then Brian, did you want to go next?
Sure, thank you. And good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Jackson. I am an inclusive pedagogy instructional coach at the Community College of Aurora, along with my teammate Jazz here. A little bit about me. I am born and raised in Park Hill in Denver. I am a product of Denver Public Schools. Denver is a very special place to me. I've taught in Denver Public Schools, led in Denver Public Schools. Family is key to me. Without family, you got nothing. And so I'm really excited about the work that we do, as you know, the overall goal is to change lives and to ultimately change the narrative. Oh, pronouns, he, him, his. Thank you.
All right, and I am Mandy Geddes. Pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm English faculty at Community College of Aurora. Between being adjunct and faculty there, I've been at CCA for, I think, 15 years now. I also have some kids who it's likely you will hear at some point because they're all just on the other side of the wall from me and probably fighting because it's summer. So family is everything, and they will probably come through the door while we're doing this.
All right, so here's our agenda for this presentation. We already went through introductions. Next, we'll go through some Title V background and our team's roles in student affairs, followed by talking about the partnership between the Title V team and the English department, as well as the Department for Instructional Intervention and Support led by Ray Keith. So this work really is a true partnership between student affairs and academic affairs. So we'll talk a little bit about that, as well as our process for redesigning curriculum and designing interventions, where we really try to center the student voice while also putting faculty and instructors in the driver's seat of intervention development and implementation. And then finally, we're gonna end with some information about or a presentation on our interventions that were developed. And that'll be primarily done by Mandy, since she is the classroom teacher. And also, most importantly, probably, we'll talk about the impact the interventions had on our students and their feedback on the interventions.
Awesome, thank you, Jazz. Title V team, which is really the whole makeup of the work that we do, is the result of what you see here, federal HSI designation. Here's what that means. Dr. Gloria Lasson Billings reveals in her research that the first colleges in this nation served only served rich white males. Throughout history, then you begin to see HBCUs, historically Black college universities, which focused on serving the Black community. Then we begin to see women's colleges, which put an emphasis on serving women. And we begin to see multiple emphasis coming about. Well, now we have Hispanic serving institutions, which is what the Community College of Aurora is designated as. What that means is 25% or more of our student population identifies as Hispanic or Latinx. And so this here, this designation, is how we even have the Title V team coming into existence at the Community College of Aurora. So as we do exist, we have these three goals in mind. Number one, to implement culturally responsive pedagogy practices and curriculum refinements. One thing you'll see we've done is we have completely revamped English 121 as well as English 122. The entire makeup of those classes is completely different from what we traditionally see in English 121 or in English 122 class. The emphasis and the overall objectives in those classes have completely changed, as well as our introductory business classes. Our second goal is to implement 2 guided pathways communities and embedded learning communities within each of those targeted areas. And so that is for students who are seeking an Associate of Science and an Associate of Arts degree. So what that means is we do have learning communities where out of those English 122 and English 121 classes and our introductory to business classes, we have a couple of those sections focused in on students who are participating in the Title V grant work. And they're getting a revamped version of those classes, and they're also receiving targeted support from the learning community experiences. And then also our third and final goal is to strengthen data-informed culture and practices. What that means is we are not looking beyond what the data, let me say that differently. We're looking at what the data doesn't show. So usually we focus on the celebrations, which that's good. You have to celebrate the milestones in your journey. But when we see that our Black students are, not performing or are struggling in certain areas, or our Latinx students are struggling in other areas, we're going to focus in on that. We're going to make decisions based on that data. And so we're not going to overlook what is obvious or what is not obvious in our data when it comes to the entire culture. And so, as I mentioned, the Title V team, this is how we're made up. We are led by our great leader, Monica, who is our project director. She leads the instructional cultures, which again is myself and my teammate, Jazz. And our learning communities, which were previously mentioned, are led by Allie and Susan, who are awesome at everything that they do. And we get the greatest support from our data specialist, which is Sumner, who really helps us solidify, our arguments with those numbers, because numbers are important. And so again, what really is important is that our instructional coaches work closely with CCA's instructional intervention and support, which again, that is what is led by Ray Keith.
So we really wanted to emphasize this idea that what we've done is a true partnership between academic affairs and student affairs. So we've talked a little bit about this Title V team, and this team has been working hand in hand with some faculty, both in the English department and in business. We're going to talk about English today. And I think there's sometimes this idea that when you work on interventions, that it's something that's handed to the faculty. And so there can be some pushback. And in these cases, what we've done is created this partnership where the faculty and instructor team are really kind of in the driver's seat. So most of the interventions are things that we were able to create. And then the Title V team, so Jazz and Brian and Susan and Allie and Monica, really helped to guide, keep us on task with the grant and keep us in line with the goals. And so every idea that faculty brought in was then taken into a team meeting where we spent the entire meeting really discussing, and everybody's input was included. And so we have this whole process that kept us on task with the grant, but also kept that faculty input and making sure that we had a space to create things that were authentic for our classrooms. And so because of that partnership, we had true benefits for our students and for student affairs and academic affairs.
So here is our design process, and it's, as you can see, it's cyclical, right? Where our design process is a research-based and evidence-based cycle of continuous data collection, modification, and refinement, always centering the student voice and student feedback, while putting faculty and instructors in the driver's seat of intervention development and implementation. So we kind of start here with stage one or phase one, foundational work. So all this work begins with a literature review. As coaches, we conduct faculty and instructor interviews on how they view what they view as issues or concerns in the curriculum and in their classes, followed by classroom observations. So Brian and myself have observed, classes and just kind of taken notes on what we see from a lens of cultural responsivity and cultural relevance, what we see in that particular class. And then we kind of take all that information together and share it with our design team, which is the next stage, right? We formed a design team, and the design team is made up of the Title V team plus faculty and instructors teaching that particular gateway course that we're focusing on. Stage two is the development of interventions and curriculum design. So that's when we kind of like do all the behind the scenes work on what's going to happen in the classroom the following semester. We develop student and instructor surveys. So here we're really trying to focus on the student voice as well as the instructor voice. And we also conduct focus groups with students to kind of find out what their baseline or their experience is in the classroom prior to us even developing the interventions. And then we use that information to guide our intervention development. The third phase is implementation. So this is the fun part. This is where we get to try to test out our hypotheses. So I used to be a scientist, so I love to kind of experiment. So phase three is the exciting part. Like we have all the things we developed in one semester, and now we're going to try them out on students. And during this process, we continually ask for feedback from students in the classroom just to ensure that we're doing these things for students, but again, we want to focus and center the student voice because, ultimately they're the ones that are driving all of this work. And then we also do some culturally responsive pedagogy training for instructors. So seeing where instructors are at the beginning of the semester or the start of this work, Brian and I kind of developed some, I wouldn't say a curriculum, but things we can discuss and study together. I've had some of my design teams do book studies, and that's a good, place where we can really kind of dig into what our beliefs are about students and pedagogy and kind of, just have those really open discussions. The fourth phase, and it looks like a long one, it's the assessment and refinement. So here's where we again, we're constantly collecting data on our students. We're looking at the efficacy of the interventions. So Brian and myself may be doing classroom observations for those classes that are piloting interventions and then giving feedback. So I like to give one-on-one feedback to instructors just from a place of hey, these are some really awesome things I saw in your classroom. And I think for next time, maybe we look at this and just giving, kind of a path to improving instruction. But again, from a lens of where the students are at and how they're experiencing the class. We also do refinement and redesign based on that data collection, and finally, scaling and expansion of the course redesign. So we start off with piloting in a few sections, and then over time, we scale to more sections and more instructors, and then ultimately more gateway courses. And this is really a cyclical process where we're constantly collecting data and then assessing, did this work? If it worked, great, we'll continue to do that. If it didn't work, let's see how we can fix that. And then if necessary, we even jump back to stage one if we need to do more lit review or do more research if something isn't working quite right. So really it's just a continuous cycle.
I'll jump in for just a second and say, yeah, for English 121, we've been through this whole cycle formally and on a large scale at least twice, where we taught the pilot the first time and then went around this cycle again before we taught the pilot a second time, realizing some of the things that needed to change or that we wanted to change.
Awesome. And as we are looking to undo the harm of traditional pedagogy, know that one of the key pillars to the work that we do is a concept created by Dr. Tarjay Yoso, which may or may not be familiar to us, to you, which is okay either way, known as community cultural wealth. And so, as we mentioned, we're looking to disrupt and disturb and completely change things, revamp things. When we enter an English class, especially, the focus is usually grammar capital. Do we understand how to use an apostrophe or how to use a colon or even a dash? And that's what we have our small group discussions about. Usually who benefits from that is white male students, because that is what they are taught early on. And that never changes throughout K through, 16, as mentioned by Dr. Emden, Chris Emden yesterday. And so what Dr. Yoso says is that we are to focus on community cultural wealth, as in what our students bring to the table is equally as important as grammar capital. So we are celebrating familial capital as something to be valued in the classroom, even social capital. Think about resistance capital when you reflect on last year and the protests and the speeches that we heard and the recognition of all the harm that was caused. These types of capitals are equally as important as grammar capital. So now, not only are our white male students who have been taught grammar capital from kindergarten or even ECE, who seem to be experts on this stuff, not only are they excelling and really performing well in the class, but so too are all of our students who are bringing familial capital or aspirational capital or cultural capital, because what our students bring to the table is equally as important. So what you'll see with our English 121 and English 122 classes is our students are focusing in on that capital that they bring to the table that really drives their learning in these classes. And so the next pillar that really drives our work is this quote from the late, great Toni Morrison from her novel, The Bluest Eye. And so what we focus in on from this quote is what's in bold here, where it says, we substituted good grammar for intellect. That part alone speaks to the whole, what capital is it that is mostly valued or only valued in an English class? It's grammar. If you understand, all the workings of the English language, writing formal essays, whatever it is, writing a fiction story, then supposedly you have intelligence. But in fact, intelligence goes so far beyond that when we add in what Dr. Tarjay Yoso has identified as community cultural wealth. And so, we are disrupting, disturbing the entire narrative by saying we are welcoming and valuing students' community cultural wealth.
All right, so what we ended up with is this, we keep using the word interventions, and so I'm going to back up just a little bit. We did come up with interventions. I think we think of interventions as like a thing that we do in a class. It's a thing that maybe we add to what was already happening in the class, or maybe we swap something out for this intervention. And we started out with some ideas of what could this thing be. And what we ended up with is really, I'm going to try to go backwards. I can't make my slides go backwards. Is really inspired by this idea that Toni Morrison was giving us of what's valued. And so valued is politeness, right? Valued is grammar. Valued is this way of behaving that's very much rooted in whiteness. And it doesn't have meaning behind it. And so we started to question, what is a good student? Well, a good student is someone who can meet all of these standards that are absolutely rooted in whiteness. And so what are the experiences of our students of color? And so what we came up with was a several pronged version of interventions. We created a menu, which I'll share with you in a little bit, of assignments. And so rather than assigning essays, we created this menu where we've curated many very culturally relevant assignments that students can choose from. And within that menu are many different modes or genres that they can present. So we're not asking students to write necessarily an academic essay. They have this menu of assignments they can choose from. And the thing that they create might not be an essay. It might be a video or a poem, a piece of art, something that they have created. They will create a text, but it might not be an essay. And the assignments are very much based in all of these cultural wealths that we're talking about. So students are able to draw on their cultural wealth or their familiar wealth, their linguistic wealth in order to create these projects. The second phase of the intervention is writing groups. And so students will meet with just each other and have a teacherless time where they are really involved in this writing or creating process together. And then the third prong is we have stopped grading student projects. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But the idea is to create a space of fearlessness, a space where students can overcome the silences that have been imposed upon them and learn to use their voices. I mean, that's really what composition class is about, right? It's not necessarily about figuring out where to put commas. It's about figuring out what I have to say and how I can say it well. And to do that, students need to understand that they have been silenced and now they have a space where that silence doesn't have to exist. And so we've had to kind of revise the way we even structure the class. We spend the first 4, 5, maybe 6 weeks not writing anything. We're not creating texts at all. Instead, what we're doing is giving students a background in the same research that we did to create the class so that they understand what we're trying to do, so that they can see the spaces where they can name the reasons why their experience in classes in the past maybe hasn't been authentic or maybe hasn't given them a space to thrive or to grow or to use their voice, so that they can name the reasons why they've felt silence. We have them read Yasso. We have them read, and so they can start to think about the cultural wealths that they bring to the class. And so we can have conversations around what cultural wealths they have and how do we turn this classroom into a community based on all of those wealths. And so we spend the first few weeks really just sitting in the theory so that students really can trust that they aren't silenced in this classroom, that they do have a space for their voice. And then you can see that the rest of the semester, we move on and actually do very much English 121-y kind of stuff. We talk about rhetoric and audience and creation and the writing process and all of those things. And while we're doing that, students are creating projects or texts that are much more authentically aligned with their wealths, much more authentically aligned with their passions. And they create some really amazing things. So before I show you some of those amazing things, I wanted to talk about the student responses to reading Yasso's article on community cultural wealth. So I wonder if we could just have a little popcorn moment, if a couple people would mind unmuting and just read some of these student comments in the box aloud for us. Don't be shy.
Yes,
Voice.
exactly. It's cultural erasure, conformity, blending of societies, but only if it's in favor of the desirable society. This is so giving me Hunger Games vibes.
Thanks, Craig. Can somebody read the second one?
If you are not from that, if you are not from the academic circle, then the option left on the table for you is to get indoctrinated with the pre-existing thinking and philosophy.
Thanks, Sarah. And the third one?
I'll do it. This kind of approach allows a student to get their power back instead of conforming to society's own ideas. Thanks,
Tawana. So really what we're looking at here is, I mean, first of all, you can see students really engaged with this text. It's, you know, this Yasso's article is, I had to read it 3 or 4 times to really get into the depths of it. And so it's not an easy read, but our students really have engaged with this. They've embraced it. And what we see in these comments is that they're seeing that what is being talked about in this article is a real reflection of their lived experience of this idea of silence and assimilation. And so students are able to grasp that and really discuss it. And then we can move on to the next step, which is where they sort of start to disrupt that. So in practice, I'm going to give you an example of something that a student created. Actually, here, let me turn my, please let me know if you can't hear it. This one is a little quiet, but this is a student's response to an assignment prompt about race in the media. And this is where a student analyzed the way race has appeared in the media. And so there's no essay here, but I think you'll be able to see as we watch this video, how much this student did the critical thinking of analysis, which is a 121 skill, clearly had to write and revise, which is an English 121 skill, and then created a text that really says something. And what it said was something that was important to him.
Did I not raise you for better? How many times have I told you you have to be what? You have to be what?
And is there a way to make it a little louder?
Twice. What? You have to be what?
Twice.
What?
Twice as good.
Twice as good as them to get half of what they have.
I included that video from Scandal because I think it applies to every person of color, especially women. People of color in the media are torn apart and overanalyzed to the max, especially when it comes to their capabilities and what they can do or their intelligence level compared to another person of a lighter complexion. This can come down to belittling or straight disrespecting them, and I'm here to talk about Miss Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or because people can't take the time to learn her name, AOC for short. So to give some background about AOC's journey, she's a Latin representative from the Bronx, New York. She made headlines as the youngest woman to ever run for Congress and win. What was extremely impressive is that she won against Joe Crowley, a 10-term representative for that district. And she only did it with the backings of her supporters, which was only a tenth of what he used for his campaign. She was a bartender and political activist prior and during her campaign. The media assumed she wasn't qualified because of her place of employment, but she actually graduated from Boston University with an economics and international relations degree. She's also worked for Ted Kennedy and Bernie Sanders. On an interview with The View, when asked why she ran, she said,
"You're only 28 years old. You'll be the youngest woman ever elected to Congress if you win. And in your campaign video, you said, women like me aren't supposed to run for office." Why did you run?
I ran because I felt like we could do better and that we could be better as a country. And I looked around. We hadn't had a primary election in 14 years in New York 14. So it was clear that no one else was going to be doing this work. And I figured, you know what, if no one else is going to do it, and if I feel like we can be better, then that means it's my responsibility to do something.
Not soon after she won and was elected into the House of Representatives, immediately critics and disrespect came. From the butchering of her name, to being made fun of for not being able to afford rent in DC right away, to even the clothes she wore. The media always seemed to have their attention on her for what seemed like any reason.
Resume that Shelby just mentioned about being from the Bronx. It turns out when you read deeper, she had a lot more formative years in Westchester County, New York, which is a little ritzier than the Bronx. I'm from.
Look, it's amazing. You know, she's been in office exactly about 24 hours, and she's comparing herself to FDR and JFK and Lincoln. Look,
nobody's demanding sanctions on China till they stop polluting. That screeching moron Ocasio-Cortez isn't.
Listen, it's like your kid spewing nonsense at you, and you're like, quiet, learn something before you come back to me. They're just letting her go. Yeah, I say keep going.
When she introduces herself, does she take on that Obama? You know, Obama put on accents.
She does the Latina thing where she does her, Anastasio Ocasio-Cortez.
AOC didn't seem bothered in the slightest by what the news and media had to say about her. She simply started to do what personally I think her best move was, and that was to elegantly clap back at people. Anyone who she deemed worthy of correction had it coming on Twitter. This became a major outlet for her to get her name out even more, and she soon became the most followed person in Congress. While becoming more popular, she always tried to incorporate people into politics, so that the average person can understand what's happening, especially young people who don't normally pay attention to politics or news. A lot of her hearings were made into clips, and they were posted on YouTube and gained millions of views. Some of these clips were her most famous questionings like Mark Zuckerberg and Michael Cohen. These questionings even gave her praise by some people in her opposing party who initially criticized her. AOC is a perfect example of someone who can overcome negativity and always use her best traits to overcome anything anyone throws at her in life. She always strives to bring good change for people even if they think it's impossible and no one's backing her. She's an example for all people, not just people of color, to take inspiration from. She inspires people to fight for their communities and evolve into a better world where everyone can live and have a chance to be successful no matter who they are.
She's looking at herself on television right now. How are you feeling? Can you put it into words?
Nope. I cannot put this into words.
All right, your supporters here are very excited for you. This was a grassroots campaign. Can you believe the numbers that you're seeing right now?
I cannot believe these numbers right now, but I do know that every single person here has worked their butt off to change the future of the Bronx and Queens. That's what I know. That's what I know. And that this victory belongs to every single grassroots organizer, every working parent, every mom, every member of the LGBTQ community. Every single person is responsible for this. Well, I think what we've seen is that working class Americans want a clear champion, and there is nothing radical about moral clarity in 2018.
All right. So I think what you can see from this student is that he was given a space to tap into some of the wealths that he brought into the class that might not have been available in a traditional or white rooted English 121 class. So he was able to speak to his cultural wealths, his aspirational wealth. He's a filmmaker or an aspiring filmmaker, his resistant capital, right? So all of these cultural wealths that he brought into the classroom, he was able to use in order to create something absolutely amazing. So had that been a traditional assignment with an essay, he might not have had a space to break that silence and use his voice in a way that was authentic to him. So let me show you the menu. So this is one of the interventions we created. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but the idea is that we've created this menu where students can make choices. And you can see there are many, many choices. And all of these meet the English 121 GT transfer outcomes. And so whatever choice they make, they're still meeting these transfer outcomes for the class. But they have, this allows this class to be much more student-led, actually truly student-led. I think as my partner who was working on this with me went into this initial pilot, we both thought we were already very student-led. And as we started to get into this, realized just how much we are still very much rooted in this very teacher-led classroom. And so this allowed us to really move the power back to the students. And so they could create their own path. So I'm going to look at the introduction. Here's just a short explanation of the menu, but the idea is you complete so many assignments throughout the semester. You choose which ones, it doesn't matter which ones. For real, you get to choose the assignments, but what's most important is that for every one of these assignments, for every one of these projects, it can be turned in any of these formats. And so, yes, you can absolutely write an essay if that's where you feel your strength is. But you can also write a letter, create a video, make a podcast. Some of my favorite projects so far have been student podcasts. Write a song, a poem, a short story, do a poster presentation or a poster project, create a piece of artwork. All of these different methods or genres or modes are viable texts. And so all of these are ways to turn in these assignments. And so you can see there are a number of different assignments that ask students to do analysis. There are a number that ask students to do argument, and they can make choices. There's a service learning assignment, there's a social justice project. And so if they're going to do research, they can jump into these projects and really get involved in things that they're passionate about and then use their voice in authentic ways. And then you can see that we have a real focus on narrative. Narrative writing is a foundation of all writing. And so it also gives students a space to take a journey into their own, who they are and who they want to be, if they want to. And so I want to show you one project. We have this Auto Historia Teoria. project, which asks students to take a journey. And so you can see this is broken down by tasks, and there are 7 steps to this project. And each of these 7 steps is a reflection that they do, and then they come up with a project that brings all of these reflections together. And so I won't go through the whole thing because this is a pretty big project, but this is a really amazing example of a student who took that journey into who they wanted to be, who they are, what their life and identity and lived experiences has been so far, and created a multimodal project based on that. And so we have the 7 steps are all outlined here, and you can see here's the first step, an ending and a beginning. And she wrote a short story. Okay, so here's the beginning. It's this beautiful short story, which I won't go into in depth, but it's a short story about her relationship with her father. And step 2 was a poem. And step 3 was a cartoon about herself. Step 4, this was a little bit more of a traditional essay, a narrative essay. Step 5, a poem. Step 6, graphic. And step 7, a handwritten letter to herself. And in this, she takes a journey into who she is and who she wanted to be. And really ends with this idea, I'll scroll back down to the end, ends with this idea of you are enough. And that's where she finishes. And so she spent almost the whole semester working on this project. You can see there's a whole lot. It is actually Enzil Dua. So Laura, you mentioned that. That's where this came from. And the students read Enzil Dua and before they work on this. And so she ends with you are enough. And so she takes this journey that allows her to create something really, really powerful and that was really authentic to who she is. So we'll go back here. We just got the 10-minute warning, so I'm gonna hurry. All right, and so I mentioned earlier that there are no grades. And the very first semester, we didn't do it this way. The first semester, we asked students to engage with this menu and to create these amazing things, but we were gonna assign grades to them. So you might create a video and it could get an A, or it could get a C, or it could get an F. And so what we experienced was a lot of students on the first project, or even the first and second project, saying, well, I'm just gonna write an essay, because they didn't trust. There was still that silence in the class. They were still feeling silence. The grades were oppressive. They didn't have a space where they trusted that they could actually create something authentic, that they could actually disrupt what we think of as an English 121 class. And so we decided, we did a whole bunch of research. We went back to that whole cycle and started with foundational research and really looked at how grades create that environment of silence, and decided that if we wanted fearlessness, if we wanted creative risk-taking, we needed to get rid of the grades. And so we moved the class to more of a contract-based grading. Our grade books are binary. Either students complete it according to the guidelines or they don't. And if they don't, they keep working on it until they do. And so it allows for that process of revision and recreation until the students are successful in really saying the thing they're trying to say. And so we have one more student comment here on fearlessness. And the student says, it's shocking that something as subtle as silence can threaten survival. It struck me that this silence is not peaceful, nourishing, or even voluntary. It's a hideous kind of silence which is deeply embedded in our roots and is not acceptable, but it thrives in our culture. It thrives because people are scared to say or write anything. And so what we wanted to do with this gradeless environment was take away that silence, to really allow a space where that type of oppression of grades didn't exist. And students could create. And if they needed to keep working on it, then they kept working on it until they were able to say the thing they wanted to say in a way that was effective. So this is what our gradebook is based on. I'm not going to go into this in depth, and we're still changing it. We're still in that revision process. But it's based on, did you complete? Did you do these things? Did you engage in the class? Did you engage with your writing group? Did you complete labor journals every week? Did you complete projects? And if you do those things, then that's your grade. And what we ended up doing is, this was a guide, and we had conferences with students, and I said, student A, what grade do you think you should have in this class? And it was a conversation. And we came to a point where we agreed on what that grade should be, based on this, based on what they created, based on how they felt like they were able to say what they wanted to say. So some last student comments. Can I have some volunteers to read, because my voice has been going for too long? Did somebody read this first student comment?
I'll read it. I look forward to the near future. Oh,
sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I look forward to the near future. I have a plethora of ideas, topics that's waiting to be talked, written about. I think my productivity levels are at an all-time high, but I want more. I have become obsessed with being better.
Thank you. The next one.
I'll do it. I am not a super great student who's always getting A's, and I'm not always very motivated. So the fact that I am motivated in this class really means something.
Thank you. The next one. Would somebody read the next one?
I was skeptic about the idea to be the center of the learning process, and I kept asking myself, what does it mean? How will my learning be impacted positively if there is no teacher? But let me tell you something. This class is the best class I've ever been to. It perfectly fits my busy mom life, and I love it. I frankly do.
Thank you. And the last one?
I have learned that college writing is not about what someone wants from you. It is about finding and owning your craft through being vulnerable.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I think what we hear them saying is this idea that they're finding a space where they can use their voice. And so, Fina, I think your question is really good in the chat. It says, why would creating diversity mean removing grades? And so it's this idea of, are we lowering standards? And I think what we found is that by removing the actual grade from the project, that we actually raise the standards. Our standard for completion is something that would have hit at like an A or B level. So we have students continue, so they can't just like complete something and turn it in and we say good. They complete it, they turn it in, and we give them feedback on it, and then they revise it again. And then they work on it in their writing groups, and then we revise it again. And so actually what I'm, like the examples I'm showing you, I want you to see that the work we're getting is actually much more in-depth, has much deeper critical analysis and thought involved, and has gone through a much larger kind of polishing and revision process than we ever got when we were just assigning projects and then getting them and assigning grades. And so we actually raised the bar, I think. And so I really appreciate that question, because I think that that's sometimes what we think of when we talk about diversity in classes and, oh, we're going to lower the bar. And I think we actually raised it by quite a bit with this. So great. And I was going to show one more sample. I think we might have time. Here's a poetry anthology of this student so the poetry anthology, they went out and did lots of research and collected many, many poems that were important to them. And then also offered, they all had to be something of a theme. They had to say something through this collection of poems, and offered reflection. And reflection is the last really big piece of this class, is the idea of reflecting on the work that you do, or reflecting on the research that you do, and understanding why it's important. And so, gosh, I wish we just had more time, but you can see here's a poem that the student chose based on this theme of self-love. And here's the reflection. And so while a poetry anthology might be seen as just like, we're going to put a bunch of poems together, this reflection that she had to complete in order to make it tell its story was much more in-depth than any reflective writing I've had a student create in any class in the past. And so you can go through the whole project, and this is something I think I can share out. We can attach links maybe if these recordings are shared out, but the project is amazing. The collection of poetry and the way she made sense of it. So just really exciting what our students are creating now. Yeah. So I think that's the end, yes, as much as we have time for. Are there any last questions or comments?
Yeah, just real quick, I was noticing that menu idea is a lot of what we talk about when we talk about universal design for learning as well. And I was just curious if that was mentioned in the literature that you used to create this process at all, like specifically UDL.
I'm not, I'll admit, I am not all that familiar with UDL. So it didn't come up in the research that I personally did, but we had a whole team researching. That was part of this collaboration and partnership, is that there was a whole team researching and making sure that through all of our perspectives, that each thing we did was authentic and valuable, and also something that was going to benefit students.
And yes to everything Laura just said in the chat as well.
I was just reading it, yeah. Yeah, definitely. So the grades as a systemic barrier. Definitely part of the research that, so initially I said that first semester we taught this pilot with the menu, we were grading. And that's exactly what we found, is that we hadn't disrupted enough, that we hadn't broken through enough of the systemic barriers in the classroom to make the classroom be a space where that oppressive silence had been broken. And so we went back to the books and did a whole bunch of research on grading and on writing groups and why those would be beneficial to that disruption. Great, so I'll send some of these links to Mandy Myers so that they can be shared out with the recording.
All right, well, I know we're 2 minutes over, so thank you again for joining us this morning. Thank you for your time and thoughtfulness with your questions. We definitely appreciate that.